Hey everyone, Laurie Spencer here. Welcome back to JFK Jr., the man behind the myth. We are now up to episode 5 of this new series. In episode 4, we took you through the years that Jackie was married to Aristotle Onassis and how John and Caroline really struggled to adjust to yet another abrupt change and a new life, and moving to a remote island in Greece and away from their family and their friends back home, and this new man, this new father figure in both of their lives while they're still at very formative ages. Those were important years for John, and in that episode too, there were some really painful, dark truths about especially how young John was affected by all of it. The new CNN documentary series, if you've watched that, this is the kind of story that happy-go-lucky documentary didn't tell you. And that is that Jacqueline Kennedy suffered terrible emotional and physical abuse from Aristotle Onassis. That's well documented, yet they avoided talking about it. And it made a huge impact on John's life because he witnessed that firsthand. While Caroline was away at school, he was there as the only other man, or young man, in the house. And it shaped a lot of his, I think, beliefs about women and about being protective of the women in his life. So you might want to go back if you haven't listened to episode 4 yet. And please do take a moment before we dive back into like this video, share that playlist link, and subscribe to this channel. Click the notifications bell too, so that you'll be notified every time a new episode goes live. The date, February 3rd, 1975. The place, Scorpios Island, Greece. Before any divorce papers could be filed, and before Jack Anderson's expose of Jackie's spending could be published, Aristotle Onassis collapsed in Athens with severe stomach pains. Jackie rushed to her husband's side and then flew with him to Paris, where surgeons at the American hospital removed his gallbladder. For the next 5 weeks, he remained comatose in room 217, a first-floor suite in the hospital's Eisenhower wing. Jackie was back at home in New York with John on March 12th, when Ari, fighting infection and the debilitating effects of his myasthenia gravis, slipped into a coma. Onassis's doctors told Jackie that her husband could die at any time and prodded her to fly back to Paris. Jackie chose instead to remain in Manhattan. 3 days later, Ari died with his daughter Christina at his side. He was 75. Jackie had just returned to 1040 after an appointment at Kenneth's hair salon when Johnny Meyer called her with the news that she was now a widow for the second time. She immediately told Meyer that she would be flying to Paris with John and Caroline aboard Ari's Learjet. As she rattled off the details, Meyer could not help but notice that Jackie sounded, quote, almost cheerful. The first call Jackie then made was to John's Uncle Ted, who had been instrumental in working out her original prenup with Ari. She would need the services of a powerful and well-connected U.S. senator to square off with Christina in negotiating a settlement now that Ari was dead. She then called her favorite designer of the moment, Valentino, and ordered a new black dress to wear to the funeral. John was at a friend's house when the call came from his mother. He was third on her list. "I'm afraid Mr. Onassis has died," she told him, matter-of-factly. John registered some small sadness at the news, but he could hardly be expected to react with an outpouring of grief. The outcome had been expected for weeks, and whatever bond Ari had forged with JFK's son had been irretrievably broken by Onassis's callous and abusive treatment of John's mother. Meanwhile, in Paris, Christina Onassis was so distraught over her father's passing, coming just 5 months after her mother Tina's mysterious death at the age of 45, that she slit her wrist. It might have been expected. The highly unstable heiress had tried to kill herself several times before, and would again. Reporters who spotted the white bandages on Christina's wrist as she left Ari's bedside were told that it was an accident, a bathroom slip, nothing more. In Christina's mind, the Black Widow was to blame for everything that had gone wrong for the Onassis family in recent years, including the deaths of her favorite aunt, Eugenie, her brother, her mother, and now her father. "I don't dislike her, you know," Christina now said. "I hate her." While Jackie went on to see Ari's body lying in state in the hospital chapel in Paris, his tan restored by mortuary cosmeticians, his arms clutching a large Orthodox crucifix to his chest, John flew on ahead to Scorpios. With him were Caroline, their uncles Ted and Jamie, and their grandmother, Janet Auchincloss. Photographers waiting to catch Jackie's arrival on Scorpios Island had to make do with hounding her kids. John buried his head in a comic book, but to no avail. Fed up, he stuck his tongue out at his tormentors, providing them with one of the day's many perplexing images. Putting on a united front, Jackie and her mop-top son clung to each other as they brought up the rear of the funeral procession. Jackie was humiliated and hurt. Arthur Schlesinger remembered as to how the Onassis family treated her at the funeral, and he said John certainly knew it. Just look at the photos taken at that time. The look of dismay in both of their faces, especially John's, is extraordinary. The moment harkened back to that day years earlier when he tried to shield Jackie from the taunts of his St. David's schoolmates. From the very beginning, Pierre Salinger said, John was his mother's protector. Nevertheless, the Greek public was outraged. "Only Christina cried," read the headline in the Athens Acropolis. Jackie was cold, it said in bold, mindful that she was being portrayed as a grasping gold digger by Ari's camp, the Greeks, she called them. Jackie remained in mourning for weeks. In the meantime, John and Caroline were dispatched to fulfill several of her social obligations. That April, Jackie sent John along on a tour of Russia with his cousins, Tim, Bobby, and Maria Shriver, and their parents, Eunice and Sargent. Even by Kennedy standards, John was a bouncing, darting, nerve-fraying bundle of energy. When he got bored listening to Sarge Shriver make a speech, he climbed to the balcony and sailed paper airplanes over the heads of his uncle's audience. Under other circumstances, Jackie, a devout Russophile, would have tagged along, but she was preoccupied trying to nail down her Onassis inheritance. At one point in May 1975, when Christina met with a group of bankers and oil executives in London, Jackie flew to England under the name Mrs. Weiberg in hopes of cornering her. Proceeding straight to Ari's permanently reserved hotel suite, she discovered that Christina had already canceled the suite and cleared out all of Jackie's clothes. In the end, Christina agreed to pay Jackie $26 million in cash, a $20 million lump sum settlement, and the additional $6 million to cover taxes. Christina Onassis took small comfort in being the world's richest woman. Ricocheting from one disastrous affair to another, she never freed herself from her dependence on pills and booze. There would be several more suicide attempts and 3 more failed marriages before Christina's naked body was discovered in a half-filled bathtub on November 19, 1988, 3 weeks short of her 38th birthday. The cause of death, pulmonary edema, resulting from her abuse of barbiturates and other prescription drugs. Ari's only grandchild, Christina's 3-year-old daughter, Athena, inherited everything. Jackie was determined not to make the same mistakes as a parent that Ari apparently made. "If you bungle raising your children," she liked to say, "I don't think whatever else you do well matters very much." An important first step was keeping her kids away from their problematic Kennedy cousins, especially Ethel's hell-raising brood. Unable or unwilling to discipline her own children, Bobby's widow presided over a household where chaos reigned supreme. At Hyannisport, the Kennedy kids were notorious for vandalizing boats tied up on the pier, ambushing tourists with water balloons, firing BB guns at passing motorists, and lobbing lit firecrackers into neighbors' homes. At a party for one of the neighborhood children, their next-door neighbor, Larry Newman, watched in disbelief as they pulled out a knife and robbed a young girl of her birthday gifts. Matters only got more out of hand during the 1970s, when John's cousins began dabbling in drugs. Drifting from one college to another on the strength of his name, Joe Kennedy II, Bobby's eldest, smoked pot and partied hard. On Nantucket one weekend, Joe took a friend's Jeep on a joyride with his brother David and David's girlfriend, Pam Kelly, in the back seat. Their wild ride ended when Joe lost control and careened off the road and into a ditch, ejecting all three occupants. Joe emerged unscathed, but Pam was paralyzed for life from the waist down. Joe certainly wasn't alone. RFK Jr. and Bobby Shriver were arrested for marijuana possession. Shriver wasn't about to repeat his mistake, but the same couldn't be said for Bobby Jr. Along with his brother David and John's cousin Christopher Lawford, Uncle Bobby's namesake became hooked on heroin. And I'll just pause here and put in a shameless plug for my podcast series about RFK Jr. If you're curious to know about his life story, our current Health and Human Services Secretary was indeed a heroin addict for 14 years. Not only heroin, but cocaine, alcohol, every drug and pill you can imagine. He was an addict for a long, long time. And all of that story of his addiction and recovery and rise to power is profiled in The Dark Side of RFK Jr. And boy, that dark side is very, very dark, as Jackie and John Jr. knew only too well. They had seen it firsthand. And of course, John's sister Caroline famously wrote an open letter to the United States Senate imploring them before Bobby's confirmation hearing not to confirm him as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Jackie tried to keep her children, John in particular, away from that gravitational pull of Hickory Hill. When Ethel called to invite John to spend 2 weeks there in the summer of 1975, Jackie's response was swift and unequivocal. "No way," she told Ted Kennedy's aide, Richard Burke. With all the stuff that was going on at Hickory Hill, especially with the problems the boys were having, Jackie just didn't want Caroline and John there, Burke said. In truth, John was perfectly capable of getting into some trouble on his own. He was only 13 when he started smoking marijuana and remained a frequent pot smoker for the rest of his life. At collegiate, he was disciplined for it numerous times. "We were always getting caught," John's classmate Wilson McCrae later said, for getting stoned. In addition, John smoked pot on the roof of his mother's apartment and in the powder room at 1040 Fifth Avenue. Between the warnings from school and the pungent aroma wafting from her powder room, Jackie must have known what John was up to. Apparently, she had no idea, however, that Caroline was growing marijuana in Jackie's vegetable garden at Hyannisport. Caroline and John both routinely availed themselves of this homegrown supply until a local policeman just happened to glance over the fence and spotted Caroline's crop nestled between Jackie's lettuce and zucchini plants. Fortunately for JFK's kids, the Hyannisport cop went straight to Jackie. Enraged, she threatened to ground them forever unless they cleaned up their act. Jackie could be frightening when she wanted to be. Suddenly, she dropped the little breathless girl voice and boom, you knew you were in trouble, Pierre Salinger said. Big trouble. Mindful of the repercussions a JFK Jr. drug bust would have, Jackie's Secret Service detail turned something of a blind eye to John's pot smoking. In turn, he ignored the fact that wherever he went, an agent was always just a few yards away. At restaurants, one Secret Service agent would usually be nursing a ginger ale at the bar, while another was positioned near the front door. When John went to the movies, a quick scan of the surrounding few rows would usually yield one suspiciously clean-cut man in his late 20s or early 30s, pretending that he was focused entirely on the screen. If John was out riding with a friend, one of the agency's blue or black Ford Crown Victorias was never more than a few car lengths behind. Jackie taught John and Caroline at an early age to be considerate of others, a lesson that Ethel clearly neglected to impart to her offspring. Jackie was all over John, his friend Billy Noonan said. She wanted him to be a regular guy, but also wanted him to be polite and dignified. Both of Jackie's kids were, Tish Baldridge agreed, sophisticated, far beyond their years, very much their mother's children. If there was one slice of pie left at a Hyannisport picnic, John and Caroline would never take it. Their Hickory Hill counterparts would knock each other over and the table, grabbing it for themselves, said Chuck Spaulding, who went on to describe pretty much all of the other Kennedys as a loud and rowdy bunch. With them, manners pretty much went out the window. Although he shared the Kennedys' competitive streak, John was reluctant to draw blood during the family's take-no-prisoners games of touch football. Sometimes those games were a bloodbath, Larry Newman later said. From generation to generation, it never changed. People really got injured during those games. Jamie Auchincloss agreed. But John held back. He wasn't the kind of person who took pleasure in hurting people. According to his friend Billy Noonan, John preferred swimming, sailing, tossing a frisbee to team sports like football and baseball. Football on the compound was a little too Kennedy-esque, not just for me, but for John, Noonan said. John joined in, he later confided to another friend, only when he got, quote, roped into it. He didn't want to seem like a snob. In truth, the other Kennedys did view John differently, especially in the immediate aftermath of Aristotle Onassis's death, when it was falsely rumored that Jackie had been left up to $100 million. He and his sister were already the stars, overshadowing everybody else, a former Hyannisport household staff member said. There was a feeling among the Kennedys that John was the crown prince of the family, and that somehow he didn't deserve it. John took most of the heat because of the position that he held in the family, his friend Rob Lytell said. He was something of an outsider. He had a slightly strained relationship with the tight-knit crew as a whole. According to his friend, these resentments could be traced to a single emotion, envy. This didn't bother him a bit, Rob Lytell went on. He had the best of many worlds, and he knew it. In September 1975, Jackie started her new job as a book editor at Viking Press and was instantly dismissed by many as a bored socialite seeking a new diversion, a rank amateur with no particular qualifications for the job. "I'm not the worst choice for this position," she fired back at her critics. "It's not as if I've never done anything interesting." Jackie still fretted about John's poor academic performance and nagged Caroline incessantly about her weight. In fact, Jackie held both of her children to the same exacting standards. Everyone knew the pressure on John to become a great man was tremendous, a prep school classmate said. But he used to say he felt sorry for his sister Caroline, because to a certain extent, people expected him to screw up along the way, while she was expected to be perfect all the time. Things nearly took another tragic turn for the Kennedys that October in 1975, when Caroline graduated from Concord Academy and began a year-long internship with Sotheby's auction house in London. While she searched for her own apartment, Caroline was staying as a guest in the home of Conservative Member of Parliament Hugh Fraser, JFK's longtime friend and a vocal critic of the Irish Republican Army. Each weekday morning, Fraser drove Caroline to her work-study program at Sotheby's in his red Jaguar sedan. They were heading out the door on the morning of October 23rd when Fraser's phone rang, and he went back inside with Caroline to take the call. At 8:53 a.m., a bomb detonated beneath Fraser's car, flipping it on its roof before it exploded into flames. The eminent cancer research specialist, Gordon Hamilton Fairley, just happened to be walking by with his dog at the moment when the bomb went off. The married father of 4 and his dog were killed instantly. Fairley's legs were blown off and his torso flung into Fraser's garden. Fraser was cut by flying glass from the shattered windows, and Caroline was thrown to the floor, but neither was seriously injured. "That call saved my life and Caroline's life," Fraser said of his last-minute decision to return to the house and answer the ringing phone. "Thank God for the telephone," he said. "Had it not been for that call, we all would have died." Jackie was awakened in New York at 7 a.m. by a call from the U.S. Embassy in London informing her of the IRA bombing and assured her that Caroline was safe and unharmed. Not wanting John to wake up to the televised footage of the carnage outside Fraser's London home, Jackie went into his room and told him what had happened. "Mummy was shaking when she told me," John later recalled. The fact that the IRA had come so close to killing one of the world's most famous Irish Americans, the only daughter of a man revered by all the world's Irish, struck John as, quote, "totally insane. It was so crazy. We were in complete shock." Jackie called Caroline and urged her to consider coming home. John telephoned his sister as well and told her that he was concerned about her safety. In the end, Caroline decided to stick it out. "Like I knew she would," John said. "Nothing rattles her." From this point on, John brooked no defense of the IRA or its terrorist tactics. When his pal Billy Noonan defended the IRA during one of their many political debates, John shot back, "Hey, your boys almost blew up my sister." And there were other safety issues that concerned Jackie, the kinds that face most parents of hormone-driven teenage boys. After Ari's death, John had somehow managed to have Alexander Onassis's motorcycle shipped to the United States and stowed it away in a friend's garage. John took the motorcycle out on remote roads where he wouldn't be spotted, but it wasn't long before Jackie learned about his new toy and promptly confiscated it. It was now September 1976, the year of America's bicentennial, and John was finally leaving home. Just as important, he would be turning 16 in just 3 months, and that meant he could finally lose that Secret Service detail that had hovered over him his entire life. "Free at last," John shouted, pumping his fist as he strode onto the campus of Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. "Free at last." If you visited John's dorm room at Andover, you would immediately look around and look on the walls and figure out that this particular room was not occupied by just any Andover freshman. You'd see a silkscreen portrait of Chairman Mao inscribed to John Kennedy Jr. by the artist Andy Warhol. You'd see a silk boxing robe from a heavyweight title bout with Muhammad Ali sewn on the back. A framed portrait of JFK hanging directly above his desk. Still, in his torn jeans, sweatshirt, and docksiders, John did pretty much look like any other preppy headed for class. Unlike most of his fellow students at a time when the legal drinking age was 18, John rarely drank to excess. He couldn't really hold his liquor, an Andover dorm mate said. 2 drinks and he was wasted, and he told me the hangovers were terrible. Whenever he went out for drinks with his buddies, John, armed with a fake ID, at this point in his life he could still easily go unrecognized on the streets, usually ordered a beer and then followed it with a ginger ale or a Sprite. Marijuana, on the other hand, was an entirely different matter. John smoked grass, said Holly Owen, the head of Andover's drama department, but it didn't appear to affect him, she said. Owen, who doubled as John's soccer coach, concluded that John's drug escapade was part of the rite of passage. There would be countless close calls and embarrassing moments, like the time he intended to plant his own pot crop at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, this time in Rose Kennedy's cutting garden, and stuffed the coat pockets of his blazer with cannabis seeds. When he left the blazer at the home of Billy Noonan's mother, she called to tease him about finding something in his pockets. "She is so fucking funny, Billy," John said. "So fucking funny, your mother." Where John's Secret Service agents and the parents of his friends chose to overlook his drug use, Andover's campus police were less accommodating. Late one night, a security guard followed the unmistakable odor of marijuana to a party where John and several of his rugby teammates were celebrating that day's victory. The guard's knock on the door triggered a mad dash to flush all the evidence, but John made no excuses. Andover followed its normal practice and called John's mother with the news that her son had been caught smoking pot. No action would be taken this time, they said, but a second such incident would lead to a suspension or even expulsion. John was surprised by his mother's low-key response. "I said I was sorry and then waited for Mummy to tear me up," he said. But instead, she was very calm and accepted my apology and told me not to do it again. Jackie's rationale was simple. He wants to fit in, and for obvious reasons, it's harder for him, she told Chuck Spaulding. "If it becomes a problem, then I'll come down hard on him, but I don't think it will." Holly Owen, who doubled as John's soccer coach, agreed. When John experimented with drugs, she said, it was only to be one of the boys, not because he was out of control. That makes a huge difference. John had already impressed Jackie with his strength of character on many occasions. In July 1976, for example, just 2 months before registering at Andover, he joined his cousin Timothy Shriver and 7 other Peace Corps volunteers working to rebuild homes in earthquake-ravaged Guatemala. Sleeping on the earthen floor of a tent barracks and surviving on a diet of tortillas and black beans, John wanted to be treated just like one of us, said Tom Doyle, a fellow volunteer on that trip. Towards that end, John built outhouses, hauled sand for bricks, and dug trenches in the stifling tropical heat. He was a very strong-willed and dedicated young man, another volunteer said of him. He didn't want people to think of him as special or pampered. Everybody was impressed with how down-to-earth he was, and I have never seen anyone physically work harder than John Kennedy did. Meanwhile, back at Andover, most of John's encounters with girls during this period were predictable. He sucked up all the female energy in the room, a classmate said. They came up to him and you were invisible. Not that every girl who encountered John, still skinny and slightly awkward at age 15, had a firm grasp on his place in history. At a party, one young woman pointed at the monogram on John's shirt. JFK, she said. Isn't that an airport? One of his teachers, Alexander Thoreau, urged him to get his priorities straight. I asked him to spend less time weightlifting, Thoreau said, and more time reading his Strunk and White book on grammar. Thoreau actually turned out to be one of John's most ardent defenders among the Andover faculty. One of the great myths is that he was dumb, said Thoreau. In a kind of reverse snobbery, that's what everybody expected him to be. In fact, he went on, John was intelligent, but not a genius. John was a very plucky, very quiet student. It was not hard to see why, Thoreau explained. All his life, people had always come to John. He did not have to make an effort to extend himself. He never had to work hard because people always met him more than halfway. Perhaps, but the rest of the faculty and administration weren't interested in excuses. At the end of the 11th grade, his grade point average was low enough to warrant expulsion. With its reputation for academic excellence, Andover has rarely allowed students to remain under such circumstances. They threw you out on your ear, one Andover alumnus said. Period. A pleading phone call from JFK's widow, however, was a powerful thing. John was allowed to stay, but he would have to repeat the 11th grade. John, cognizant of his reputation for being intellectually lacking, was embarrassed when news of his being held back a year hit the papers. "Are you a poor student?" a reporter asked him point blank. "Well, I don't know," John answered blithely. "That depends on what you call a poor student." There was one area at Andover in which John did make an effort to excel. Seriously bitten by the acting bug after he sang and danced in Oliver at Collegiate, John now signed up for Andover's production of Petticoats and Union Suits. Lured by the prospect of watching John embarrass himself, the theater critic for the New York Times wrote that, quote, "One can't help but be aware of the 15-year-old John Kennedy in his role, although, like the others in his celebrated family, he seems to be trying painfully to avoid special attention." Undaunted, John went on to act opposite his girlfriend, Jenny Christian, in Megan Terry's Comings and Goings, and later in Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. His toughest acting assignment at Andover would be taking on the lead role of McMurphy in Ken Kesey's frightening look at life inside a mental hospital, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Knowing his mother was in the opening night audience and hearing her gasp with every harrowing turn in the plot made John slightly crazy, a fellow cast member said. But at the same time, he was obviously proud of what he was doing and happy that she was there. For 10 months, between 1976 and 1977, Jackie and the columnist, Pete Hamill, who was 5 years her junior, were virtually inseparable, until an unpublished column of his about Jackie surfaced. In it, he excoriated Jackie for exploiting her position as, quote, "some national object of veneration." She was not, of course, a victim of that veneration, he wrote. She encouraged it, indulged it, created the desire for more knowledge by cultivating the image of aloofness. He went on to say her spending habits were, quote, "outrageous and obscene." The New York Post pointed out in its article on the couple that it was Hamill who wrote of Jackie, quote, "No courtesan ever sold herself for more." John shared his mother's taste for gossip, and when he read about Hamill's comments in the New York Post, he called his mother up to comfort her and to share his less than charitable view of Hamill dating her. He needn't have worried about Hamill. Throwing her social schedule into overdrive, Jackie reverted to dating old standbys like John Sargent or Brendan Gill, the author, and documentary filmmaker Peter Davis. Soon, though, one contender would emerge from the pack, someone who clearly had no interest in the limelight and whose quiet, dignified demeanor belied a fierce devotion to Jackie. John would later say he'd been rooting for Maurice Templesman from the beginning. And in fact, Maurice, Jackie's longtime and last companion, just passed away last week. He was in his 90s, but, by all accounts, he treated her better than any of her other two husbands, better than Jack treated her, certainly much better than Aristotle Onassis had treated her, and that for those 15 years that she spent with Maurice, that Jackie was actually happier than she had ever been. So I want to take a few moments to tell you about Maurice Templesman, because not a lot was known about him. He kind of stayed out of the limelight, and little hats off to the late Maurice. Born into an Orthodox Jewish family in Antwerp, Belgium, Templesman fled the Nazis and came to New York in 1940. Skipping an opportunity to attend college, he went straight into his father's diamond importing business, Leon Templesman and Son. Maurice shrewdly hired former Illinois Senator and two-time Democratic presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson as his lawyer. And Adlai, a close friend of Jackie, promptly linked Templesman up with the powerful Oppenheimer diamond mining dynasty. Soon, Maurice was a sight holder, one of only 160 people on the planet permitted to buy diamonds direct from the De Beers cartel, and then only 10 times a year. Casting his lot with the Democrats, Templesman contributed heavily to the party and was soon fast friends with young Senator John Kennedy and his captivating bride. Frequent guests at the White House, Maurice and his wife Lily were even invited to the first state affair hosted by JFK and Jackie, the spectacular candlelit dinner for Pakistan's president on the lawn at Mount Vernon. Jackie actually had one of her earliest dates following Ari's death with Templesman, a figure virtually unknown to the American public. On August 20th, 1975, they caught the new Broadway musical, Chicago, followed by an after-theater supper that lasted until 3 a.m. As had been the case with so many of her other lovers, Templesman was still very much married. To further complicate matters, he and the devoutly Orthodox Lily had 3 children, ranging in age from 14 to 21. After years spent in the company of such commanding figures as Jack and Bobby Kennedy and Aristotle Onassis, it seemed odd that Jackie would fall for the portly, balding, comparatively drab diamond merchant. Husbands did not always treat her the way she deserved, said Jackie's friend Vivian Crespi. Templesman, on the other hand, quote, worshipped the ground she walked on. He did not dominate her. She did not dominate him. They were equals. Lily Templesman, meanwhile, kept the home fires burning at the couple's apartment on Riverside Drive. Far more devout than her husband, Lily refused to divorce him under New York law, but did grant Maurice a get, an Orthodox Jewish divorce, after he moved in with Jackie at 1040 Fifth Avenue in 1982. When asked in 1977 what she thought about Jackie dating her husband, she fired back, "Why don't you ask her?" That summer of 1977, John's visits to Hyannisport were few and far between, by Jackie's design. Meanwhile, the Kennedy cousins grew increasingly wild and undisciplined, according to Rose Kennedy's secretary, Barbara Gibson, taking what they wanted, feeling above moral bounds, she said. Whenever Ethel's kids visited their grandmother Rose Kennedy on Cape Cod or in Palm Beach, Gibson added, quote, it was like a horde of rampaging Huns was descending on us. John, on the other hand, she said, was perfectly respectful and polite whenever he came to visit. He was, Gibson added, clearly the product of his mother's love and concern. John's perfectly respectful and polite attitude did not always extend to his friends, perhaps out of a feeling of entitlement, perhaps merely due to absent-mindedness. Jackie's son was chronically late for everything. If there was something to be done, he invariably did it at the very last possible minute. He expected to be admitted to any party, theatrical event, sports event, or concert, whether or not he had a ticket, an invitation, or a pass. He seldom carried cash or credit cards, expecting whoever he was with to pick up the tab. If he suddenly became tired, bored, or distracted at a social event, John simply picked up and left, sometimes leaving his friends behind without a way to get home. Billy Noonan wrote in his memoir, Forever Young, that years later, when John had his own apartment in New York, he would invite friends over for the weekend and forget to leave them a key. There they'd be, left on John's front stoop, fending for themselves while he was off who knows where. As John got older, George Plimpton observed, Jackie used to complain that he was constantly on the move and that he didn't always stop to consider the impact his actions would take on others. She also used to say, Jack was a lot like that too. As part of her ongoing campaign to toughen up John and keep him away from his cousins in the process, Jackie enrolled him in Outward Bound's survival training program on Maine's rock-bound Hurricane Island. To graduate from the program, John had to spend 3 days alone on a desert island, surviving only on 3 gallons of water and whatever edible plants he was able to find in the wild. John loved it. Once back at Andover, however, John quickly grew bored again. He kept getting into mischief on campus, and his grades continued to stagnate. On a weekend home from school, John was caught pouring glue down the building's mail chute, a stunt that was serious enough to prod Jackie into action. She was casting about for something to occupy John when a Wyoming congressman who had been a friend of JFK recommended that she send her son to the Bar Cross Ranch to work as a wrangler. She wanted John to get out and around, ranch owner John Perry Barlow said, to get in closer contact with the salt of the earth and to get his hands on something real. Jackie was pleased that the experience wasn't going to cost her anything. John would bunk with the other ranch hands and was to be paid whatever they were paid. Although his share of the Kennedy fortune already amounted to more than $5 million, it was enough that Mummy wasn't footing the bill this time. This was John's first paying job. When he arrived at the Bar Cross Ranch in the summer of 1978, John was like a giant Labrador puppy, recalled Barlow, whose own varied resume included a stint writing songs for the Grateful Dead. Lots of energy, but little focus. He was amenable to being focused. He knew he had to measure up, and he loved the challenge. The rest of the hired hands weren't exactly thrilled. "Oh, come on," they told Barlow. "You're not going to do this to us." Yet, said Barlow, almost immediately John won everybody over. No one could argue with John's work ethic. He dug post holes for a corral fence with ravenous intensity, Barlow said. He went at it as if he was killing snakes. Later, while rounding up cattle on horseback, he admitted that others than his immediate family were probably better suited to that task. "You really need my mother and my sister up here," John cracked. During those 6 weeks in Wyoming, John never once complained about anything, Barlow said. It took no time at all for him to be totally in his element, working hard, learning the ropes, and just loving it, completely loving every minute of it. When he returned to 1040, weather-beaten and 10 pounds lighter, Jackie was thrilled. "They kept saying I was a miracle worker," Barlow later said, but he was already a miracle when he got here. To celebrate Caroline's 21st birthday and John's 18th, Jackie invited 150 people to New York's chic Le Club on November 26, 1978. All of the Kennedys were there as friends of the birthday boy and girl, and more than a few luminaries from the worlds of society, show business, and politics. President Jimmy Carter couldn't make it, sending Secretary of State Cyrus Vance in his stead. "The passing of the torch theme was pretty obvious," said one guest. Indeed, the invitation actually showed an angel holding 2 torches. It had been 15 years since JFK was shot to death, and now his only surviving brother stood to toast John and Caroline. "I shouldn't be doing this tonight," Ted Kennedy said, his voice quavering. "By rights, it should have been the father of these 2 children. Jack loved his children more than anything else. Young John and Caroline bring new life to the family." Bunny Mellon, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., George Plimpton, Cyrus Vance, Maurice Templesman, Jackie's distant cousin, Louis Auchincloss, and the rest of Jackie's crowd sipped Dom Perignon, while John's Andover pals guzzled beer and tequila and smoked cigars. Most of those over 30 drifted off by 11, and a little after midnight, Ted, Eunice, Ethel, and Jackie headed home. Once they were gone, John and his friends lit up a few joints, drank Hennessy stingers from wine goblets, and then danced to the disco beat of the Bee Gees, Gloria Gaynor, and Donna Summer. At 4 a.m., Billy Noonan stuck his head out the door and snarled at the pack of photographers who'd been gathered outside for hours. "I'm giving you fair warning," he told them. "Don't start any shit." Within seconds, John emerged wearing a black jacket, a long white scarf, and sunglasses. The paparazzi lunged forward, and Noonan bolted for them as promised. As Noonan got ready to throw the first punch, John not only tried to hold his friend back, but put his hand over his mouth to shut him up. It was too late. A Donnybrook ensued, and John was knocked to the pavement. "Stop!" he yelled, pleading with everyone to back off as he struggled, sunglasses in his hand, to pull himself up on the rear fender of a parked car. That didn't work either. As his friends and the photographers wrestled outside the club, John grabbed Jenny Christensen's hand and sprinted to the corner. There they flagged a cab that took them back home to 1040. Newspapers the next day were filled with photos of the big brawl, the most memorable images showing John spread eagle on the sidewalk while his buddies clenched their fists and spewed epithets. Mortified at his behavior, Billy Noonan wrote a long letter of apology to Jackie. She responded by inviting him to the Kennedy family birthday party, although she was not about to let them forget this lapse in judgment. From now on, when she saw John and his friends headed out the door wearing sunglasses, she delivered the same line. "Oh, dark glasses. Are you boys going out looking for a fight?" John and Jackie faced the press together at his Andover graduation ceremony when they had to make their way through a mob of photographers just to reach the buffet table. John was visibly angry. "Look," he said to the reporters, "I just want to spend some time with my mates and enjoy my graduation." An old hand at moments like these, Jackie merely ignored them. "Oh, Ted," she told the senator within earshot of reporters, "can you believe it? My baby is graduating." By this time, John was making ample use of the apartment his father used to keep in Boston. Sparsely decorated, it served as little more than a crash pad for John and his Andover buddies. Between visits to local pubs like the Black Rose and the Bull and Finch, which of course is famous as the inspiration for the bar in the television series Cheers, John continued his work with troubled teens. At the Massachusetts State House, located just up the street from the Kennedy apartment, John showed groups of juvenile offenders a movie called Scared Straight, the graphic documentary about life behind bars. Even the most incorrigible delinquents watched in shocked silence. "Jesus," John said after screening several episodes. "It should have been called Scared Shitless," he said. Jackie was scared too, scared that, left to his own devices after prep school graduation, John would now fall prey to Ethel's Hickory Hill mob. Jackie was hearing one horror story after another, and she was more determined than ever that John not be sucked into that. Just how far Jackie was willing to go surprised even John. With half a dozen others, he spent the summer of 1979 trekking through the wilds of Kenya as part of a 10-week course run by the National Outdoor Leadership School. Confident that her son was in the hands of trained professionals, Jackie was blissfully unaware of the fact that John's party got hopelessly lost on its first week out. A vote was taken, and his fellow survivalists agreed that John had the requisite skills to lead them back to their base. As they hacked their way through dense undergrowth with John in the lead, all he could think of was how upsetting this all was for Jackie. "I just hope the press doesn't get wind of this," he told the others. "My mother will be frantic." Not surprisingly, course officials began to panic too. In a spare-no-expense effort to locate JFK Jr., search planes were dispatched, along with scores of local natives who scoured the region on foot. After 2 full days, a native stumbled upon John and his team. They had wandered into a village in the remotest part of Kenya, where on the wall of one family's hut hung a photo of John's father. Jackie was nonplussed when she was informed that her son had been rescued. "Rescued?" she asked. As it turned out, no one had bothered to tell her about John's ordeal until after he had been found. There was no time to dwell on the tragedy that might have been. Jackie was far too immersed in getting her son into just the right college. John was accepted by Harvard, his father's alma mater, but he didn't want to go. He knew he hadn't earned it, John Perry Barlow said. John knew it was strictly because of who he was and that he didn't have the grades, so he didn't go there. John wanted to chart his own course, and Jackie understood that completely. It's hard enough being in his father's shadow out in the wider world, she told Arthur Schlesinger. Can you imagine the expectations at Harvard? What a burden that would be. John had his pick of schools like Princeton, Yale, Dartmouth, and Columbia, but he was also realistic about his chances of ever measuring up academically. Founded in 1764, Brown University had by 1979 become the school of choice for wealthy prep school graduates for one reason. It provided the Ivy League experience without the rigorous academic demands. For starters, Brown had no core requirements for graduation, and each student was encouraged to devise his own academic program. A cluster of white clapboard and red brick buildings perched on a hill in the middle of Providence, Rhode Island, Brown University offered John little protection from the press. When he showed up to register, photographers caused such a scene that he promised he would pose in front of the Brown University sign at the campus entrance if they would just leave him alone long enough to enroll. As accustomed as he was to such attention, John hated being embarrassed in front of the other students. Half the time, he was sort of saying under his breath, "Okay, have you had enough?" one photographer recalled. "I feel really dumb doing this. Can we stop now, guys? Guys?" According to Bob Lytell, one of John's closest friends at Brown, John just wanted to be a college kid, not a freak show. One time-honored way to gain immediate acceptance with one's peers, of course, was to join a fraternity. John happily endured the indignities of Hell Night at Phi Psi, going through an initiation ritual that included wallowing in animal entrails, guzzling a pitcher of beer, swallowing a goldfish, of course, being paddled, and picking up an olive by clenching his derriere, all topped off by streaking naked across the campus. John was also soon impressing his fraternity brothers with, among other things, his ability to attract beautiful women. Fairly typical was the time Billy Way, who had been a friend of John's at Andover, burst in the front door, trailed by several co-eds. The minute one of them realized John was sitting on the couch, she walked up to him and demanded that he prove he was really JFK Jr. and not a look-alike. Once John produced his wallet, the young woman thrust her hand down the front of his pants, then led him off to one of the bedrooms. John's frat brothers weren't above taking advantage of his star power. When they hung a sign outside saying he was in residence, there was a line of attractive co-eds waiting to get in the door. When you're 18 years old, Bob Lytell later said, you can get into a lot of trouble when people respond to you like that. An astounding number of women wanted to sleep with him, but he almost always resisted the sexual opportunities that came his way, preferring real relationships. Not long after streaking across the campus to howls from ogling brown co-eds, John delivered his very first public speech at the October 29, 1979 dedication ceremony for the John F. Kennedy Library outside Boston. Not yet 19 and already standing a broad-shouldered 6'1", the skinny adolescent who had scuffed with the paparazzi just the year before was now a strikingly handsome cross between the Kennedys and the Bouviers. Looking out over an audience that included President Jimmy Carter and dozens of familiar faces from JFK's New Frontier, John held the crowd spellbound with his reading of Stephen Spender's poem, I Think Continually of Those Who Were Truly Great. As they filed outside after the ceremony, John and Jackie paused by JFK's sailboat, the Victoria, which is displayed outside the library. You know, he whispered, I don't even remember him. Sometimes I think I might, but I don't. Jackie put her hand on John's shoulder and then, slowly, led them towards their waiting car. At Brown, he tried to conjure up those lost memories, studying his father and his policies just like any other student, taking an American history seminar on the Kennedy administration and the war in Vietnam. I had heard John was a dummy, that he was more interested in sex than in school, said Professor Steve Gillen, who taught the course on JFK's presidency. But he was very articulate and intelligent. He contributed things to the discussion that went beyond the textbook. Gillen went on to say that John, who referred to his father in class simply as the president, actually, quote, dominated the discussion in certain areas, such as civil rights and the role of the Supreme Court. John received a respectable B+ in the class, not enough to counterbalance his failing grades in other classes. Spurred on by a desire to tackle the issues that had confronted his dad, John tapped several classmates for an informal debate society. They quickly discovered that, although he could debate both sides of an issue, he had strong opinions on everything from abortion rights to racism to nuclear disarmament. We were all impressed by how much he knew, how passionate he was, said one student. He wasn't at all reluctant to show his serious side. According to the man John came to call his best friend, John's own passion for politics could be traced back directly to debates with Jackie and her intellectual friends over dinner at Hyannisport. John used that setting as, quote, theater, Billy Noonan recalled. He pondered aloud his interests and concerns, gesturing with his hands, cutting the air to make his point. This was where John developed, like an actor, his love of debate and engagement. As perfectly suited as he may have seemed for the world of politics, John's true passion wasn't world affairs or history, it was acting. When he appeared in March 1980 as the soldier Bonario in Ben Jonson's Volpone, the reviewer for the Brown Daily Herald gave John a 5-star review, then publicly retracted it in a follow-up piece. In his retraction, the student critic decided that, quote, John doesn't move well. He's very inhibited and self-conscious on the stage, and his voice is off-putting. He sounds like a rich New York preppy. But in real life, he didn't act like a rich New York preppy. For everyone, the greeting was always the same. Hi, I'm John. Never John Kennedy, always just John. He would totally disarm you by asking questions, and not in that artificial way people have of pretending to be interested in you. He really wanted to know about other people's lives. There were plenty of reminders that John was anything but a regular guy. On the opening night of In the Boom Boom Room, another actor in the play, Rick Moody, was backstage waiting to go on when a hearty laugh boomed from the audience. "That's my sister," John said, grinning. "That's Caroline." Appearing for the first time in public wearing a crew cut, John even managed to upstage the co-ed who played his girlfriend, and she had gone topless for the role. Describing JFK Jr.'s acting style wasn't easy. A little Brando, a little De Niro, a healthy dollop of Nicholson, maybe a dash of his dad's inaugural pluck, Moody said, adding that he was initially surprised that John delivered his lines with uncanny reserves of charisma. Then he wondered, what's the surprise in this? He's been acting his entire life. All actors are hiding behind a mask, said Katharine Hepburn, who found John's interest in acting, quote, perfectly logical. It's really the perfect way to cope with celebrity, because people are only seeing you play a character. They don't get to the real you. Adding to that Freudian mix, John began collecting actual masks from Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Eventually, there were scary ones and hairy ones, comical and mystical, Robert Lytell said. The implication, in a Psych 101 way, is that John was attracted to masks because he wore one himself for so long, figuratively speaking. Jackie dutifully came to nearly all of John's performances and was invariably caught up in the moment whenever he set foot on stage. Her reactions were pretty intense, especially if something bad was happening to John's character, a fellow student said. She'd gasp and grab Caroline's arm. She was completely caught up in it. John's acting, Jackie told Robert Lytell at one point, is the thing that brings me the most joy. But when Saturday Night Fever producer Robert Stigwood offered 19-year-old John the chance to play his father in a feature film based on JFK's early years, a part John desperately wanted, Jackie vetoed that idea. In the meantime, Jackie had arranged Templesman to quietly arrange for John to spend the summer of 1980 in South Africa, learning the ins and outs of the diamond trade. There was always the possibility, Jackie reasoned, that John might wish to join the Templesman family business. This must have been to ingratiate herself with Maurice, Gore Vidal later opined. Yes, Jackie loved money and very rich men, but she wasn't about to see Jack Kennedy's son grubbing around in the jewelry business. John was clearly not about to follow in Templesman's footsteps, but his South African sojourn did yield results of another sort. Having witnessed the evils of apartheid firsthand, he returned to Brown University determined to take action. With Jackie's blessing and some financial backing from Templesman, John set up a campus lecture series aimed at spreading the word about the dire political situation in South Africa. His first speaker was Andrew Young, civil rights pioneer, one-time Atlanta mayor, and former ambassador to the United Nations. His social consciousness aside, though, John was digging a deeper and deeper hole for himself academically. Jackie rightly feared that John might drop out of college at any moment, or, even more likely, be kicked out. He had always been a less than conscientious student, but throughout his time at Brown, John flirted with expulsion. John was reminded that in his first 2 years at university, he had failed to pass 4 courses in any given semester. Even with our modest graduation requirements, Professor Edward Beiser warned him, you are skating on very thin ice. Neither I nor John will fail to be galvanized by your message, Jackie wrote back when faculty contacted her directly with the news that John was about to be expelled. Informed that her son was on academic probation, she wrote to the academic dean that the, quote, vital lesson of how to allot every second of his time would sink in as he frantically tries to make up his work. A year later, as he did extra work to make up for unfinished assignments and poor test results, Jackie sat down in Hyannisport and dashed off a letter to John's professor. I look forward to hearing that he is off probation, she wrote, and to never getting another notice that he is on it. Yet John still yearned to be an actor and sought out his ex-uncle Peter Lawford for advice. If that's your dream, Lawford told him, then do it. Jackie was anything but pleased when she found out and wrote Peter Lawford telling him not to interfere. That, of course, made Peter even more determined to support John in whatever it was he wanted to do. John continued to smoke pot and, perhaps driven by that need for acceptance, even experimented with a little stronger stuff. At one party, he was present when his friends allegedly passed around a silver straw and an ashtray filled with cocaine. Each time someone took a hit, a little more of the design on the bottom of the ashtray was revealed. Once the ashtray got to John, the face of John Fitzgerald Kennedy was staring up at them, with 1917 to 1963 printed below his name. Everyone paused. Then John, said one witness, saw what was on the ashtray and took the cocaine anyway. Every single day of his life, there was something there to remind John of the father he lost. It might have just been a passing mention of the airport or one of the countless highways and schools named after JFK. There was an unspoken rule among John's friends never to bring up his father's name, and certainly never to mention the assassination. But the event was so embedded in the nation's consciousness that it came up all the time, said Rob Lytell, And when it did, he added, John didn't flinch. JFK Jr. even seemed to take some solace in cultural references to his father. A diehard fan of the Rolling Stones, John never hesitated to sing along to his favorite Rolling Stones song, Sympathy for the Devil, when it was playing on the car radio or on the streets of college, putting special emphasis on the lines, I shouted out, "Who killed the Kennedys?" when, after all, it was you and me. Given all that was expected of him, John was keenly aware that most people felt he had fallen short somehow. Although most reporters agreed that John had already proven himself to be the most polite and down-to-earth of the Kennedys, their stories about him painted a very different picture. When he was mugged in Central Park on the way to a private tennis lesson, John was portrayed as a clueless brat who lacked the street smarts of any other New Yorker. Newspapers ran story after story about his poor academic performance, and when John was held back a year at Andover, the press seemed to confirm that he was the dimmest bulb on the Kennedy compound's porch. The birthday party fracas that left him sprawled on the pavement didn't help much either, nor did photos that ran around the world of John in the foppish period costumes he wore for student productions like The Comedy of Errors and Volpone. Even his hairstyles over the years, from Little Lord Fauntleroy Bob to the Prince Valiant page boy to pre-Raphaelite curls, conveyed an unflattering image of upper-class snobbery and entitlement. John was the first person to acknowledge that this growing perception that he was a spoiled rich kid wasn't entirely inaccurate. Well, aren't I all those things? John conceded. Let's be honest here. I've got it pretty damn good. I know that, and I'm very grateful. Senator Ted Kennedy knew that his favorite nephew didn't deserve his reputation as an aristocratic airhead. During the summer of 1981, John was earning $100 a week as an intern at former North Carolina Governor Terry Sanford's Institute for Policy Sciences and Public Affairs at Duke University. Ted begged Jackie to let her son give a press conference there. People should see, Senator Kennedy reasoned, that there is a lot more to John than what they've been reading about him in the papers. The news conference gave everyone their first real glimpse of the media-savvy charmer John had become. One reporter couldn't resist teasing him about the ink stain on his white shirt. I would wear one of those plastic pocket protectors, he shot back, but they make you look like a Republican. He also informed the press that he was teaching himself the guitar. Was he thinking of a political career? One reporter asked. I'm not really thinking about careers at the moment, John replied honestly. I'm not a big planner. Uncle Ted was thrilled with the outcome of John's first press conference and passed his feeling along to Jackie. He's a natural, the senator told her. He had them eating out of the palm of his hand, just like his father. In his junior year, John decided to move off campus and into a house atop a cobblestone paved hill at 155 Benefit Street. His new housemates were Rob Littell, of course, tennis team captain John Hare, his girlfriend Christina, and Christiane Amanpour, known as Kissy to her roommates, who was destined to become one of the most famous names in television news as a star correspondent for CNN and CBS. By this time, he had also broken up with Jenny Christian, who was at Harvard studying psychology. The two remained friends for life. As a matter of course, John would maintain warm and lasting friendships with all of his former lovers. Not a single one would go on record making even a mildly negative comment about him. John's wider reputation as the Hyannisport heartthrob gained more traction when the tabloids started running photos of John horsing around with friends on the beach or getting ready to scuba dive. You'd be standing on a street corner and he'd just whip off his shirt for no apparent reason, one friend said. John, who then weighed 175 pounds but could bench press 250, was proud of the fact that he was in great shape, Rick Guy later said. It was no good trying to meet girls when Mr. Adonis was around, a classmate added. They had absolutely no interest in you, unless somehow they thought you were the way to get to him. John decided that he wanted to go to Yale Drama School, an idea that was immediately nixed by Jackie. She wanted him to go to law school, the logical next move in a course charted for Washington. There were reports, all fallacious as it turned out, that Jackie had threatened to disinherit her son if he didn't play along. As crestfallen as he undoubtedly was, John didn't put up a fight, not this time. He was very protective of her, a friend said of John's attitude towards his mother, and wouldn't do anything to disappoint her, even if it meant giving up something that was really important to him. He would not be going to Yale Drama School, but he wasn't rushing to enroll at law school quite yet either. On June 6, 1983, John marched onto the green at Brown University with the rest of the graduating seniors, all sweating in their polyester gowns beneath a blazing sun. John was seriously hungover from a party at his Benefit Street digs that had dragged on until 7 that morning. Searching above the heads of his classmates as everyone filed into their seats, he finally spotted Jackie in the crowd and waved, "Hi, Mom!" John's cool, calm, collected persona masked a roiling inner turmoil over who he really was, where he fit in, and what he really remembered about his father. One reason John kept in more or less constant motion, working out, running, biking, skiing, water skiing, kayaking, swimming, roller skating, hiking, skydiving, was to avoid having to dwell on the historic events that shaped his young life and where it all might lead in the future. If I stopped to think about it all, he told Rob Lytell, I would just sit down and fall apart. Yet he did stop to think. There was an introspective side to John, unknown to the public and even to many of his friends. This was the side of John that found comfort in just heading into the wilderness alone for days, or spending endless hours paddling a one-man kayak off the shore of Cape Cod. With college now behind him, John took more long, solitary walks at night atop the narrow breakwater that extended from Hyannisport into Nantucket Sound. The wind was often howling, and waves crashed against the rocks. It was often not the safest place for him to be. "What the hell were you doing out there by yourself?" Billy Noonan would ask his friend. "Pondering," John would answer. And I think I'm going to leave that there for you to ponder as we explore the life of John F. Kennedy Jr. together in this ongoing biography series, JFK Jr., the man behind the myth. I hope you're enjoying it and feel like you're getting to know John a little bit better, the way that we did, the way that CNN didn't show you, and that really I don't think any book or biopic is really quite captured. So thank you for tuning in. We do this every weekend. I'll be back next week with episode 6. And in the meantime, if you're into the Kennedys and you're interested in more of the later years and what happened after the assassinations of JFK and RFK and what happened to all the various branches of the Kennedy family, check out my book club series, The Kennedys After Camelot, on this channel. And I think that'll keep you busy and entertained until I see you back here next Saturday night. Till then, take care, be well. I'm Lori Spencer. Thanks for listening.